Hello. Welcome to this week's presentation on data analysis, and this is kind of a brief look into using our classroom data to positively impact our learners. In our course, one of the key concepts here as we enter towards the last third of our course together is this quality improvement. And we know that in order to improve what we're doing, positively impact our learners, move everyone forward in the education process, we have to collect data, we have to make sense of this data, and we have to use this data to inform our decisions. So the goals for this presentation include two. First of all, I'm going to highlight some suggestions for assessment data gathering and analysis from typically the classroom vantage point. However, we will relate this to more programmatic data gathering as well, and how this kind of all plays into one big piece. And what I hope for this presentation, because I know we have a variety of individuals in our course who are in different places in their current work and have different experiences. So I hope that for some of you, you will gain some new ideas, and for others that this will just affirm your current practices regarding the analysis of data and how you use that as an instructor in your own classroom, and how it can be used to positively impact instruction and learning. So first of all, when we think of the data analysis process, and we've talked previously about formative and summative assessments, we've talked about programmatic collection of data, and so we need to collect and examine data. And I think it's very important that we always remember that we need to first know what our targets and our goals are. So just as kind of the understanding by design, we need to understand what our desired results are, because then hopefully our assessment processes have matched these desired results, and so we can begin to collect this data to inform our instruction and our decisions. So as we collect and examine this data, what we want to do is we want to identify trends and patterns, and we want to figure out the implications that these trends and patterns are having, not only for our course or our modules or our unit or our program. And then when we find these trends, patterns, and we start making these implications, we need to verify them. So we need to look at our data analysis or our data again. We need to have small group discussions with faculty that may be teaching some of the same things that we are. We may need to talk with our department if it's more of a programmatic aspect, but we need to verify these patterns, and then we need to make conclusions, and then those conclusions will help us to plan and modify our instruction and our curriculum. So we're going to kind of talk about these 4 points of the data analysis process in this presentation. So first of all, we collect and examine our data. Enough said. Take your formative assessments, take your summative assessments, bring all of that data together, and I'm going to show you kind of how we can identify some trends and patterns within this data. So there are 4 things that I'm going to talk about real quick, and this is from Butler and McMunn, 2006, and it's their analysis processes. So first of all, it's the change over time data, where we see trends in performance. Secondly, anecdotal data, which is also known as observational data. Third, grade distributions, so your range of scores and your item analysis. And 4, your assignment distributions or assignment trends. Now, again, for some of you this is going to be brand new information, and for some of you I hope that we can confirm that you are making great choices. And for those of you who are kind of in the middle and who are instructing right now, and you realize, oh wow, I'm doing this, this is another thing, another process I think where we can name it and claim it. So there will probably be some new vocabulary for some of you also, where you're like, oh, I do that, I just never knew what that was called. So first of all, we have our change over time data. And this is when we regularly sample learners' work in relation to the learning targets, goals, objectives, competencies. And so examples of this include portfolios, running records, work samples, video, audio recordings, and anecdotal notes. Okay, so again, this will be something that we would start in the beginning. So maybe you have a portfolio for your program and you start your students off when they're freshmen and they'll finish their portfolio when they're seniors. And it could be that you have students over even one semester collect work samples and put them together, and so you can begin to see what their process is over the semester and how they've improved and what strengths they have and maybe what areas they still have to work on. But as with anything, it's important that when we start to look at our change over time data that we always know what learning targets, what are we trying to document, how is what we're collecting relate back to our learning targets, goals, objectives, or competencies. Now, secondly, we have our anecdotal data. This is just written descriptions of student behaviors and performances. So a lot of you probably know this more as observational data. But again, when we set out to observe group work, or we want to observe someone working in the lab, or we want to observe someone teaching someone in your company or your place of business, or they're the out in the health professions working with those who are poor or those who are doing training on the job training or whatever it would be. We need to know always what our specific learning targets or goals are. And then we need to observe what's happening, what are our students doing, and we need to make sure that we are taking the notes. Sometimes I know that I am guilty of this too, that I observe, but I don't write any anecdotal data down. And sometimes I think this anecdotal data can be very rich when we write down quotes from our learners, or we write down specific mistakes they may make in their work, and so we can come back and revisit that. So you need to make sure that you're writing this stuff down, and then that of course when you're done, when your class walks out the door, when your module is done, when your folks go home at 5 o'clock, that you then can sit down and you can kind of reflect on those notes that you have taken and that anecdotal data, and come up with the trends and the patterns and the information that you discover. Third, we have grade distribution. Now, most of you who are working as a faculty, as a teacher, as an instructor, you are already working with grades daily, okay? So those of you who have not, who are not in a position yet to have grade distributions, and some of you may not have grades per se, but you may have module scores or something like that, so it will be kind of the same thing for you someday or now. But what we want to do is we want to examine our grades or our scores for individuals and our whole group, okay? And especially when we think about our whole group, this is some of the information that will help us in that quality improvement and seeing how well did the group do with objective A, competency C, whatever it would be. And we also, I think it's really important that we analyze test items also. And then I really do believe in creating a visual. So I'll talk about these things in a little bit more detail. When I think of grade distribution, I think of whole class scores, and I also think of item analysis. Now, the whole class scores, as you can see from this pie chart, are pretty simple. We can see that 13% had an A, 21% had a B, and so on. And so looking at kind of the whole picture of how did my learners do on this formative or this summative assessment, it gives us a really nice picture. But what I like to do even more is I like to do the item analysis. And what I do with these is I will create charts for each question. And the chart I have here, as you can see, we have 10 students and I had 7 questions. And so question 1, there are 10, all 10 students got it correct. So whatever question 1, whatever learning target, goal, or objective that was connected to, I can see that the students were successful. But as I move on down my question set, when I get to 5, 6, and 7, I can see that there were more who got this question incorrect than they did correct. And so something is missing in my instruction, and I need to go back and I need to revisit the instructional strategies that I selected, the materials or the resources that I used, and the way that we worked with this concept. And so I think the item analysis is a really strong way also to understand if you are meeting the goals and objectives that you set out to meet with your unit, your program, whatever it would be. And then with the assignment distributions, this is just using the overall picture of the learners and their work. I like this because it can identify individual trends and it can also identify group trends. Now, this is pretty specific to a teacher right here. So for those of you who are instructing or are currently in the classroom, something like this may look familiar to you. And for others, I think you could do this in a number of ways depending on what the need is. But this is just Jack's semester scores. And we can see that his reading center scores are pretty good. His in class, which is the blue, he does a really great job working in class. His quizzes, we fall between the 55 and then all the way up to maybe about 80. But it's real. But I mean, look at the variance in his homework scores. And so we can kind of start to identify these trends and patterns that maybe homework isn't the thing for Jack, because he does pretty good when I have him here with me, but when he has to take stuff home and he's responsible for these things at home, it just doesn't work well. So again, you can apply whatever it is in your field, in your work, to this kind of assignment analysis and looking for these trends. And you could do it for every learner that you have in your setting or your classroom, whatever it would be, but then you may choose those that are struggling to begin with and kind of start simple on those that are struggling and see what areas is it that I can help them on. How can I improve what I do, and how can we improve the learners' engagement, excitement, motivation for the course content. Okay, so as I said earlier, we need to verify these patterns. Okay, so we have all these different ways that we can collect this data, our anecdotal data, our patterns, our visuals, and we need to then kind of sit down with someone and we need to go over what it is we're finding. If it's programmatic, we will sit down with the faculty in our department and we will talk about the data that we have uncovered and what kind of implications that these have, and we verify these patterns. We share our data, we talk about our data, we problem solve with our data, and that will allow us to more effectively make the conclusions that we need to make for either our course, our unit, or our program, our department. Okay, and then we plan and we modify our instruction. So this whole cycle, we just keep going with our cycle. And I think it's really important that we find tried and true methods that will help our students learn, but we also need to be open to new ideas as well. And so depending on your area of focus and what it is that you do in your daily job, there are strategies, instructional strategies, assessment choices that you make each day. And if those are working, then great, but I think it's always important to improve. But then we also need to be open to find new ways to reach our learners, to motivate our learners, to engage our learners with the content. And excuse me, I know we've talked about these two things previously in our course, but I am a firm believer in differentiated instruction, where we look at how we can differentiate the content, what we teach, the process, how we teach it, and the product, which is how learners represent what they know, as well as our environment where this instruction takes place. And then with Marzano's 9 instructional strategies, we have these research-based effective ways to instruct in our classroom, our module. And so we need to constantly be thinking about how can we change our instruction, how can we improve our program and improve our course. So, in summary, we know that we need to collect and examine our data, and we need to always keep in mind our learning targets and goals. What are our desired results, and how are we going to know that we have met these results? And then we want to use this data, and we want to identify trends and patterns and the implications that these have. And then eventually we want to sit down with others, and we want to have a dialogue about this data so that we can verify our patterns and make our conclusions. And from there, we then plan and modify our instruction, and we just keep going, because for quality improvement, it has to be a continuous process. It has to be something that we do every semester, every cycle of working through professional development. We have to make sure that we are always constantly improving, and using our data is the best way to do this. So the goals for this presentation were that I highlighted some suggestions for assessment data gathering and analysis, and I truly hope that